Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Yesterday, we were meeting with our team. By we, I mean you and I, Joel. We were meeting with our team to talk about marketing a program that we are updating, right? So one of the programs that we have is effectively personal growth materials designed for each personality type. And we're doing a full update on all of them. And we're starting with INTPs. So as we're talking about the marketing for encouraging people, you, the listener, to come get your personal growth program designed for your type so we can keep all this machine running, the person we were talking to, who's kind of recently come on our team, he's an ENTJ, his name is Brian. And Brian was actually, he was actually pushing us in all the right ways by questioning whether or not the basis or foundation of our marketing in and of itself was even sound. There's a point to this, by the way, so just hang tight. So the thing that he was saying, particularly as an ENTJ, is that when he comes into the personality hacker ecosystem, he sees all of this messaging about like find out about your personality type and explore more and discover how your mind is wired. And in traditional ENTJ fashion, he asked the question of, how is this going to improve my life in any way whatsoever? What if I don't really care that much about my personality type and I show up here, I just happen to stumble upon this. What's going to make me feel like this is worth my time and effort? He's like, take for example, should I buy a box of cookies? Right? Like I'm really honestly thinking about buying a box of cookies. Will this information help me in my decision to make a box, to buy a box of cookies? And we had some conversation around, whether or not knowing he's an ENTJ could help him buy a box of cookies or with that decision. And by the way, it does. It does. I charted it out and I'll tell you that in just a minute or later on the podcast. But as we were going through this conversation, what became clear to us is that one of the reasons why we as people, you and me as individuals, look to personality psychology is not just to learn more about ourselves, which, yes, we are captivated and fascinated by who we are as people as individuals. And personality psychology gives us tools and language and maps and different, lenses to see ourselves through. It gives us really sort of cairns and guideposts towards, all of the complexity that is me, right? Like knowing that I have the cognitive function stack of an ENTP makes my life infinitely easier because I can quickly add language to some things that might be complex or I might not really understand about myself or might be mysteries. But at the end of the day, beyond simply diving into who and what I am and what that means for me, the most important thing I think that, personality psychology and personality types and really growth in and of itself is this going to help me make better decisions? Because my life is a series of one decision after another. And my biggest pain points come when, one, I don't have clarity and I don't know what decision to make. And so I just sit and churn and time goes by and opportunities go by and energy is taken from not knowing what decision to make. Or two, I've made a decision and it was the wrong decision. And now I've got to do a bunch of cleanup around it. One of the things that knowing how your mind is wired does for you is it helps map a system of decision-making processes. And of course, we focus more on the judging functions when we're talking about decisions. But really, every cognitive function feeds into the emergent that is the decision we end up making. And that includes the perceiving functions as well. To conclude the anecdote, you and I, Joel, were really focused on this idea of how to have better messaging around the higher quality decisions one can make when they understand this stuff. Like you come to the homepage and instead it's like, instead of take the test and figure out who you are, maybe we should just boldly proclaim, make better decisions. Now, of course, we were talking to an ENTJ and decision making is very important to ENTJs. But in some ways, that's part of the magic of that personality type is to distill down what it is we're actually all looking for and like the quickest possible, language, the most actionable language. And I think this idea that growth, development, and personality psychology as a subset or as a tool wrapped into that growth and development fundamentally rests on the power of understanding ourselves enough to make the highest quality decisions possible.
I think this idea of a systems approach to decision making and the emergence of those systems is a very interesting concept that we can all study and learn from and really work with. So there's this idea, again, we've recorded a podcast on systems thinking because I think you and I, Antonia, don't believe in cause and effect. It's this idea that, A causes B. B is actually an emergent of an entire system running. And A might be a node in that system, but it didn't necessarily cause B to happen. So we recorded a whole podcast on that framework and how our minds are usually thinking about things. And when we come to decision-making and personality type, we talk about personality type as a system. And I think decision-making, it's easy to, like you said, identify. Like I use introverted feeling as my cognitive function for decision making. It'd be easy to say, oh, I just look at the core values or what resonates with me or what's authentic, and I make a decision toward that. But there's an entire system running, and my perceiving function, the backseat of my car, my 10-year-old or tertiary, my inferior or 3-year-old, all of these things play into the decisions that are set up for me in the first place, the decisions I even have on my docket, and then the way I make decisions about the decisions that are presented to me. There's a whole system running. These things emerge from our personalities and from obviously our environments and other systems running. But I think that idea of decisions as a system running is already an interesting concept. If we as people can start thinking in that, just that alone, even without the benefit or the tool set of personalities, I think that can be helpful in a lot of ways.
The modern world makes decisions very difficult as well because we end up having oftentimes way more choices than we need to. There's a whole psychology behind how it makes us feel, sort of like the chemical hit we get when we believe we have a lot of variety of choice. And at the same time, we end up in analysis paralysis because when we have so many choices, well, which one is the right one? So in sort of this contradictory way, the thing that makes us feel good, right? Ooh, I have a lot of decisions here. Also, at the same time, makes decisions very, very complicated. It's just way too much. And because marketers know that, they give us a ton of variety all the time. And so our decision-making faculties end up really, a lot of that real estate goes into making very mundane decisions when our major life decisions also are getting more and more complex. In a world of postmodernism, where you basically can make up any worldview you want to, right? You can just fashion whatever worldview you want, or you have in front of you a variety of paradigms and worldviews, which is not the choice that people had in the past, right? You had the paradigm and worldview of your community. And if you didn't, sometimes that led to your death. And so there was not a lot of choice in the past, but now you can literally believe anything you want to. And there's somebody else out there who's going to provide for you evidence to support that claim. There just is. You're going to find them on the internet. Now there's 2 of you, right? And so because of that, we don't just have choices on like what spaghetti sauce we're going to choose. We have as many varieties and flavors of paradigms and worldviews as we do with spaghetti sauces in the store. And so our mental real estate, unlike any time period in the past, is going to so many decisions. In the past, you also had a limitation on who you were going to spend your life with. It was the people in your 150-person village or 1,000-person village, or it was arranged for you. The choice was completely taken out of your hands. And so even things like pair bonding, now we have access to almost, just about 7 billion people online in some capacity. You can fly anywhere in the world. You can meet thousands upon thousands of people. You can run into them digitally online. You can swipe right? Is it swiping right or left?
I don't know.
I don't remember. Whichever swipe you do when you say you want somebody. Like, there's so many different ways to choose people now. And so it's like, well, who do you end up with? There's a variety of careers. It used to be that, my pappy and my pappy's pappy were blacksmiths, so I guess I'm a blacksmith, right? But now it's, whatever your parents are doing, they're trying, whatever their profession is, they're trying to provide for you the opportunity to choose whatever you want to be doing when you grow up. And so things that were taken from us as decisions in the past, which may have felt oppressive and at the same time was also a way to free up mental real estate to think about other things. Now in the present context, we have blank page syndrome on almost everything. Everything is this wide open landscape of decisions that we can make. So any tool that we can find that helps us make better decisions and know ourselves enough to make the highest quality decisions is a major boon. And I think that that's one of the things that I like the most about cognitive functions in particular and personality psychology in general.
As a quick side note, I was watching Brian as we were working with him the other day as an ENTJ. It was actually brilliant what he does. He brings us decisions that he's already predetermined in some way. So typically he'll say, okay, guys, now we got to get this one information page set up here with this button to learn more. Do you guys want to A, have the button up here at the top next to the video, or B, have it down below the text after they read more information? And first of all, there's a pre-decision there. We're putting a button on a page. He's already determined it, and he's brought it to us in a way. And then we're deciding where we want it on that page. And it reminds me of giving, our daughter Piper, do you want to take a bath and then brush your teeth and go to bed? Or would you like to brush your teeth and then take your bath and go to bed? So it feels like she's getting to make like a lot of decision, but really I'm making decisions for her. I'm letting her pick the flavor of the decisions I've kind of presented to her. And in Brian's case, I don't feel like a little kid being treated badly. I actually appreciate it because he's helping as probably a TE primary would in most circumstances, helping us limit down our decision making to where we can actually make a decision. He's making it easier for us. He's predetermining things and feeding it to us in a way that actually helps us execute on that. Because you and I, Antonia, are perceiving primaries. We're intuitives. We would spend the next 5 hours discussing all the possibilities we could do on this page. And I don't think he even thinks he's right when he's saying we should put the button on this page. He's basically saying, let's do something. We'll figure out if we're right or not after we make the decision. Let's test it. Let's see how it works. Let's get it done, and then we'll find out. And again, you and I would spend 5 or 6 hours talking about the philosophy of buttons and should we even have buttons? Maybe it should be text. What does a button communicate? Like we would just keep going in intuitive loops, opening and opening and opening, right?
Yeah, TE is extroverted thinking or effectiveness, by the way, if you're a newer listener. So that's actually kind of some of the genius of ENTJs, by the way, is that they're really good at understanding how people need to be making decisions, and they understand the value of decision making and quick decision making. And test iterating afterwards. Because I think a lot of ENTJs in general calibrate through action. They take action, they figure out how it worked, and then they go back and make the better decision afterwards. Whereas most of the rest of us don't do that. We agonize over decisions and want to make the best one first. And that's one of the lessons I think actually that ETJs give to ITJs is the value of taking action and then calibrating along the way. So to go back to the original story, which is Brian asking whether or not he should go buy cookies, right? As an ENTJ, should he go buy cookies? And he said, is there an answer to that? And I said, actually, there is an answer to that. And I used him as an example, or his cognitive function stack as an example, to say, these are the things that you're going to want to think about when you're considering the cookie purchase, which is that ENTJs have extroverted sensing or sensation as their 10-year-old or tertiary function. And that's the part of them that lacks impulse control. It's the part of them that wants to indulge themselves, and that includes with things like food and cookies. As an ENTJ, he doesn't want the child part of him making this decision. He wants to make sure that it's been vetted by the more mature, sophisticated adult parts of who he is. So has the co-pilot or auxiliary function of introverted intuition or perspectives, has it thought through the implication of these cookies? Has it considered all of the different modifiers and the things that these cookies might represent? Like, is this something that is a way that he has a tendency to medicate himself? Is this something that he has a tendency to do and because of this need to buy cookies, this compulsion, is it something that's actually throwing off his ability to honor his body? Or is this one of the things where he's, been taking care of himself, he's been eating nutrient-dense foods, he's been working out, he's got a finger on the pulse of his health, and a cookie now and then is actually a reward mechanism to encourage him to keep doing this. So has his perspectives or introverted intuition process thought about the implication of this choice, and is it on board? Is it going, yeah, actually cookies are not a problem, it's not going to throw us off, it's not going to compromise the health of our bodies, and it's going to be okay. And then the desire then gets folded into the implication. And as an ENTJ, if his extroverted thinking or effectiveness process can go, I'm ticking off all the boxes of knowing that this is a perfectly fine choice that is not going to have long-range damage and isn't feeding into any compulsion or addiction, it should be totally fine.
What's powerful about what Antonia just laid out is the systems approach to an ENTJ deciding whether or not to go buy cookies. Because if you notice, a lot of the time was spent looking at the perceiving functions of an ENTJ, the extroverted sensing, 10-year-old tertiary, and the introverted intuition or perspectives, co-pilot or auxiliary. Because it's a system running and those processes need to be consulted to make the best decision. So you can see that these decisions aren't in isolation. They're not being made just with our decision-making functions. There's an entire system running in our personalities that make the best decisions for us.
Well, and it was mentioned using extroverted thinking or effectiveness as a driver or dominant function for an ENTJ. They're going to err on the side of making quick decisions and then calibrating later, which when you're talking about what button to put on a web page might not be that big of a deal. But when you're talking about things like the quality of the food you're putting into your body, then that's something that should be taken, like long-term implications should be taken into consideration. And when somebody is just using a decision-making function like extroverted thinking or effectiveness, like it might be a quick caloric hit to get a cookie inside you. You get the sugar, you get the ability to like maybe stay awake in the afternoon, you get that sugar rush, there's a lot of things about buying a pack of cookies and eating them that might be very efficient. Like it's waking you up. It's getting you where you want to go. But the long-term implications of it is you'll have a sugar crash later, which you may have taken into consideration. And the even longer-term implications are how often are you relying upon this? Is this your hack for getting through the rest of the day? And are you lacking impulse control in general? So there are elements to every personality type that make it so that a decision should be, like, even the smallest decisions can be routed through these systems. Okay, so let's take a different personality type and use the same cookie, should I buy a pack of cookies, the same rubric. Let's choose somebody who doesn't share any of the same functions. Let's say like an INTP. So is it okay for the INTP to buy a pack of cookies, right? Or should they buy a pack of cookies? Well, again, you have to sort of put it through what you know about the functions of an INTP and determine why they're doing what they're doing. For an INTP, is this something where their inferior or 3-year-old extroverted feeling or harmony function is medicating itself through comfort foods, right? Because extroverted feeling or harmony has a tendency to self-medicate through things that make it feel good, like food. And so is this something that is an inferior function trying to medicate through a problem? Now, a pack of cookies is not that big of a deal, but it is if the pack of cookies is now a part of a compulsion, which, in the modern world, that's not uncommon. A lot of us are medicating through food. A lot of us are just not able to say no to ourselves when it comes to calories, food, sugar, that sort of thing. So it becomes a bigger and bigger, this little tiny stupid question becomes actually one of greater implication when you look around and see like the obesity rates. So is this person doing something as a compulsion to feed an inner hollowness, right? And if the answer is no, then the next question is this something that they're doing because it's what they grew up with? Is their introverted sensing or memory function, that's their 10-year-old or tertiary, is this something that's just what they're used to and they haven't put much thought or time and effort into the concept of how to feed yourself with higher quality nutrient-dense foods? Like, is this just something I've always done? And if that's the case, then the answer is still no, right? Because you don't want to be making decisions with your 10-year-old or tertiary inferior function if they're guiding you down a path of frequency. In the case of the ENTJ, It was as long as the adults in the car were on board and had thought about long-term implications. Well, with an INTP, this is also something that they need to do, is to get into the dominant driver or auxiliary co-pilot to ensure that it's being vetted and routed through those parts of them as well. For introverted thinking or accuracy, there is a part of that function that really understands the value of discipline and integrity. And if it's on board, if it's saying, yeah, actually, this is totally fine. This is not something that's compromising my discipline, my self-discipline, my integrity to myself to be the best machine I can be, which is kind of an INTP way of thinking about themselves when they're going down a road of growth and development. They think about themselves as a holistic machine. Is this something that is not going to dishonor the holistic machine? And if their extroverted intuition or exploration co-pilot or auxiliary function says, no, this is not just simply something that we do as a comfort. It's not something to avoid responsibility. This is actually something that, yeah, like let's go do it. It's a treat. It's something that is outside the norm for me to do, and I'm on board with that. Then if the whole thing is making sure, if like the whole system is making sure that the 10-year-old tertiary or a 3-year-old inferior is not calling the shots, then you probably have a pretty decent decision on your hands and the cookies are a go. Also, an INTP could be going and trying new styles of cookies, like the kinds of cookies that are more nutrient dense, or the ones that, you know, like using this as a way to expand their horizons. If this is not simply a matter of going and getting, like, you know, the Chips Ahoy pack and like eating the entire thing tonight as you sit in front of Netflix, if this is more like trying out new things to expand your horizons in general, then this is probably a good decision to make. So it's a matter of understanding your cognitive function stack and how the backseat passengers have a tendency to try to take control and to monitor for that and to not say no to your kids. Like, I remember my mom one time saying that she says yes to her kids as often as she can because she has to say no with such frequency. And so when it comes to your tertiary 10-year-old or your 3-year-old inferior, we should be saying no to them most of the time. Just like with most kids, you actually should be saying no to your kids most of the time. Because what they want is unreasonable most of the time, because they're kids, they're fantasists. So most of the time you should be saying no to this part of who you are when they are trying to compel you to make decisions that are unsophisticated. And you should say yes as often as possible in the sense that they shouldn't be pushed aside or shoved aside. The things that they want are usually unsophisticated, and sometimes it's okay to do that. So one of the things that you can do when you're asking yourself how to make the highest quality decisions is to go into your CAR model or your cognitive function stack, write them all out, and go, what are the ways that my 10-year-old and my 3-year-old have a tendency to try to compel me to make actions or take actions that are not healthy for me? And how often can I say yes to some of those quote unquote unhealthy things? Because a little bit of unhealthy is actually healthy. Like a little bit of fluoride is good for you, right? So a little bit of saying yes to those parts of who you are actually keeps everybody happy and in, you know, sort of like in simpatico with each other. But they shouldn't be taking over. So the highest quality decisions are the ones that are always routed through and vetted through your dominant driver and your auxiliary co-pilot.
So I think that's the place we start, is with ourselves, right? We, like you said, Antonia, take our CAR model, our cognitive function stack, our CAR model, and we look at our cognitive functions, the way our brain's wired to learn information, make decisions. We see it as a system, and we honor the parts of us in making those decisions. And this becomes really useful, not just with ourselves now, but the people in our lives, friends, family. When people come to you as a person, and this is something we talk about in our Profiler coaching program. After people go through our Profiler training, we talk about how to use typology to coach and help other people make good decisions. It's really powerful to be able to have that model when someone comes to you. It's almost like you're this magical wizard or sage, and you typically have good advice or good answers because you're looking at people's decision-making questions they bring to you as the system of them. You're looking at it through their eyes as how they're wired to view these decisions. So just like Antonia was able to walk Brian through the answer to, should I go buy a pack of cookies? At least maybe not to the conclusion. She didn't offer him, here's what you should do. She offered him a process. She offered him a way of looking at this decision, an entire system running to make a better decision. And yeah, you're going to mess up from time to time, but if you start applying the principles of seeing it as a system, you're going to get better and better at making those decisions. So when someone comes to you and asks you a question for your advice for a decision they should make, should I break up with my boyfriend? Should I go for this new job? You can take them as who they are and run it through what you know about cognitive functions and personality type and help walk them through the system logic of how they're wired to make the best decision possible. And that's really powerful. Now we're talking about a whole nother level of not just for yourself, but helping other people make good decisions.
There's an idea that you and I have been playing around with lately. It's don't take this as gospel, please. There's no seal put on this, but this is just kind of a thought that we've been having, which is that, we talk about perceiving functions being the information gathering and what we have a tendency to focus on, and the judging functions being the decision making or sort of the thing that determines what should be happening. We call it the shouldness of it all. And we've been playing around with this idea that if the judging functions or decision making, then what their purpose is to come to conclusions. That's the purpose of a judging function, is to decide, to come to a conclusion, to have an answer. And the perceiving functions could be the ones that ask the questions, right? Like they're the ones that open up loops. They're the ones that are looking for more information to feed over to the judging functions to have answers. So the perceiving functions are the questions and the judging functions are the answers, which is, I don't know if it's entirely accurate, but it's an interesting way of looking at this, particularly as somebody who uses introverted thinking or accuracy, because I've always said that the thing that I see a lot of very healthy TPs doing is that they get more fascinated by questions and answers. But I actually wonder if in some way that's also an answer, because the answer, you can never rely on an answer in totality for introverted thinking. There's always something you're missing. And so questions themselves become a form of an answer. So I think it still works out for introverted thinking or accuracy to be focused on answers. It's just the answers never come, so you must get fascinated by the questions. Or rather, the answers are never knowable. Like at the end of that tunnel, like you never can actually know. But of course, introverted thinking or accuracy is looking for a different type of answer, because the extroverted judging functions, like extroverted thinking effectiveness or extroverted feeling harmony, they're not looking for an answer to the universe. They're looking for an action step. What's the right action to take? So the extroverted judging functions would be answers in the form of specific actions. And the introverted judging functions would be looking for answers in the form of what makes sense or what's honest or authentic to you. So both introverted feeling authenticity and introverted thinking or accuracy, both of them would actually end up constantly and perpetually not coming to a conclusion, which is why they're sort of fascinating in and of themselves. They're compelled to come to conclusions that will never come.
Meaning idealized information or authenticity. There's like an idealized conclusion they're seeking that they'll never get to.
Yeah, because it's ultimate, right? Who are you ultimately? As a person who uses introverted feeling or authenticity, who are you ultimately?
It's a lifetime quest.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never get to that answer.
Yeah. What's the answer to the universe? Which is what introverted thinking always wants to know. Like, how does everything work? How does literally everything work? And the answer is like, I don't know. And so the introverted judging functions still want to come to conclusions, but they literally cannot. And so they end up being judging functions that can't come to a specific conclusion. And that makes them, that's, by the way, this is one of the reasons why it's really hard to motivate people using this function or who are using this function. It's hard to motivate them because they're waiting for an answer that will never surface, which is the conclusion of it all. Who am I? So they have to take action. A person using an introverted judging function has to take action without having the conclusion that they desire, which is this is not something shared by people who use an extroverted judging function. Like, all they need is a conclusion to an action. And once they have enough sense of what action to take, and they can calibrate on the way, like where to put the button, that's all they needed. They just needed enough information to take the action. The introverted judging functions will never get enough information to take an action because they, by definition, will never come to an ultimate conclusion. And that's why it's so difficult to get that function relying on that function into action. So people who are using these functions, the introverted judging functions, IPs in particular, and EPs, must rely on the extroverted perceiving function. The action has to be taken to explore. Like, all actions must be taken without the certainty of why the action is being taken to begin with, what the conclusion will be, and whether or not you'll ever know. So perceivers, which are the ones who are always using extroverted perceiving functions, they have to get to a place where action is like the feeling of motion, the feeling of doing is regardless of whether or not it answers anything. Just simply being out in space and experiencing whatever they end up experiencing, they have to fall in love with that behavior. They have to go explore. They have to go feel. They have to go sense. By feel, I mean kinesthetically, using extroverted sensing or sensation. They have to fall in love with simply the experience of it all. And one of the nice things is the more you do that, the more information you get to plug in to your introverted judging function, because you've gained access to more information. You get to plug it in, and you can go do the thing that is both, intrinsically rewarding and maddening, which is keep asking the questions that will never have ultimate conclusions, but has enough conclusions to keep you going. Like, who are you, right? Using introverted feeling. Well, you don't know who you ultimately are, but I'm sure you've gained a lot of information over your 41 years that gives you enough of a sense of who you are.
And I would love to make decisions to keep pursuing that question. So the decision I make is often in the pursuit of that ideal again. Like, and for introverted thinking, you're pursuing the ultimate answer. I call it prime number thinking. I think introverted thinking always looking for the prime component of thought that can't be broken down anymore, like for everything. And that's the pursuit that they'll make decisions toward no matter what. Like, oh, okay, I can keep pursuing that. Great, I make a decision to go toward that then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think judgers, this is something that I think a lot of judgers don't understand about perceivers, is that perceivers will never feel good enough to take an action, so they just must act, right? And that almost probably sounds contradictory to what I was saying with extroverted thinking, dominant or driver, that will take an action and calibrate along the way. Well, they're not taking the action because they don't feel satisfied. They're taking, with their conclusion, they're taking the action because they did get enough information to form a conclusion, right? They pared it down to just a couple options and they just went with one, and then the response that the world gives back to it will then will either confirm that their conclusion was accurate, or will tell them what the actual right conclusion was. And then once they plug that in and implement, then they don't have to think about that anymore. That's done. That's complete. And so there's this sense with extroverted judging functions that there's not that much information that's needed to proceed, and they don't feel there's a much smaller threshold of conclusiveness that is required to satisfy those processes. Like, you don't need to keep talking and thinking and going down the rabbit's hole like you do with the introverted judging functions to feel good about moving forward. Now, a person who's an IJ might disagree with that, right? The IJs might go, no, I feel like I have to get all my ducks in a row, and I feel like I have to constantly, perpetually be asking questions and going down the rabbit's hole. But that's because you're relying too much on your 10-year-old or tertiary. It's because your dominant or driver function of introverted intuition, perspectives, or introverted sensing memory has convinced itself that it needs more information, it needs more rumination time, because that's intrinsically rewarding in and of itself, and so doesn't really go to the co-pilot or auxiliary of the quick decisiveness and the action, and very little information needed to form a conclusion, to respond, or to get into action. It bypasses that and goes to the 10-year-old or tertiary, which allows it to continually and perpetually question itself, because that's also intrinsically rewarding to that function. So then you're in a loop, basically. But there's actually not that much information needed to get into action for the extroverted judging functions. And so this is something that I think is an interesting difference between judgers and perceivers.
Well, the other thing, too, to remember is the extroverted judging functions are bound by time and space and things in the external world. And there are probably metaphysical or, ethereal things in the material world, but often we have a limited set of things we can manipulate. Like there's so many relationships for an extroverted feeling harmony user to manage and to deal with. There's not a lot of theory, whereas introverted thinking is thinking about the meaning of thought and the universe and all this stuff. And extroverted thinking, there's actual resource in the outer world. So you need less, there's not as much room to play with. You're actually executing on things that are real. They're real relationships. They're real resources. It's out there. It's the space of the real. And so you need a lot less, I don't know if you'd want to say, you use the word information, but you need a lot less, or there's a lot less play there because there's physical or person manifestations of the external world represented.
Yeah, exactly. I say the word information because all of those things, in my opinion, are information.
Sure.
Everything you're talking about, everything in the outside world is just information.
You're introverted thinking, of course you would say that.
Right. So what's the point of all of this?
Yeah, let's bring this all back down.
Okay. Because we ended up going, hey, we're thinking about this idea, and boom, we went on this huge tangent, and let's bring it back. So what does this all relate to you looking at your car model or your cognitive function stack in front of you and this idea of making better decisions? Well, if you understand the nature of each of these functions, it helps you know how they trick you. Introverted intuition and introverted sensing, perspectives, and memory. These are the functions that will never get enough information because you're going inside of yourself and constantly and perpetually ruminating. In the same way that the introverted judging functions of introverted thinking, accuracy, and introverted feeling, authenticity, will never come to satisfying conclusions, introverted sensing and introverted intuition will never have enough rumination time. Right? Because there's just always something to be ruminating over in the internal landscape. It's called the human brain, and it's infinite. And that includes introverted sensing or memory because you cannot fully process every experience you've ever had. The impressions that you've been given from the outside world that are inside of you, you literally do not have enough time to go through and process them all, right? There's just too many of them. And every moment you're experiencing more. Every moment you're cataloging more. And in the same way with introverted intuition, there are infinite patterns that are, or what feels like infinite patterns being made inside the human brain. And that's just yours, right? And then there's all these infinite patterns being made in everybody else's brains that are also equally interesting. So one of the tricks in decision making that these functions do is that there's always more to think about. There's always more to process. There's always more questions to be asked inside of the mind. The challenge with the extroverted perceiving functions like extroverted intuition, exploration, and extroverted sensing or sensation, the challenge with them is that they're not taking actions based on conclusions. They're taking actions because the questions are all found outside of us. And so they're going to constantly and perpetually be exploring terrain without coming to any conclusion. So those of us who lead with that, all of us EPs, find ourselves having the really difficult time making decisions because we're coupling this idea of just exploring for exploring's sake or just experiencing for experience's sake. We're coupling that with the function, the introverted judging function of introverted thinking or introverted feeling that never comes to a conclusion as well because the answers can never actually be found, right? So you can see why EPs and IPs have hard time making decisions, right? Like it's this challenge of wrangling in your two functions, the ones that you're supposed to be relying on, to just come to a damn conclusion already, right?
For a perceiver, there's endless things to explore in the outer world, and the inner world's decision-making has an ideal to it, so you're never going to arrive at that ideal.
That's exactly it. And so those are some of the ways in which it tricks us, right? That extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing. Like it tricks us into going, you don't have to come to conclusions because you're experiencing for experience's sake. The trick that extroverted judging functions, or the way that those trick judgers in particular, so that would be extroverted thinking, effectiveness, and extroverted feeling, harmony, is that you actually don't need that much information. You just need enough information to implement immediately, right? You just come to a quick conclusion and go. And so the way that tricks people is that even though you might be getting into action a lot, you might be taking the wrong action on a regular basis if you don't give yourself enough rumination time, if you don't give yourself enough space to think about it and think about implications. You might be incredibly decisive and making all the wrong decisions. And then with the introverted thinking functions, introverted judging functions, like introverted thinking, introverted feeling, as mentioned, there is no conclusion that can be come to because the actual answer or the actual question that they're asking is infinite, right? What is the meaning and what is the nature of reality? And what is the nature of who I am as an individual? And so those don't have conclusions. So each one of these functions has some way of tricking us and making it very difficult for us to ultimately make a decision. And at the same time, they also facilitate our decisions. They're actually the way, understanding this dance of all of them is the way that we actually end up coming to the best conclusions.
This is, again, why that system of all the functions in your car model or stack are so important because they all influence each other. You already see, and hopefully you're not getting lost here because we're getting into some heady stuff. So hopefully we're not losing you with some of the things we're saying here. But basically, we're saying that if you look at one of these in isolation, there's some limitations in decision-making with any of the functions if you isolated them. It's your entire personality working together as a system that helps you make the best decisions possible. That's really what we're trying to say here in the entire podcast.
Yeah, because each of the functions makes up for the deficiencies of other functions, unless you're in a loop. If you're in a loop, then the weaknesses of your dominant driver and your 10-year-old tertiary will oftentimes sort of exacerbate each other.
They reinforce each other.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why the co-pilot or auxiliary function is so important, is it's a check and balance system for those other two functions.
It breaks the codependency of your primary, your driver, and your 10-year-old or tertiary function. Like when they get in a cabal with each other, that co-pilot's a great third party to come in and break that up and say, hey, there's other factors here at play for us to make the best decisions in our lives. So you've been listening along, and even if you've gotten lost, even if you know exactly what's going on, it doesn't matter. Let's get real practical here. Would you rather open up a car model of your personality type on your computer screen, or would you rather print one off in front of you and ask yourself the question with which one of those choices you want to do? Should you go out and buy a pack of cookies? Look at your cognitive function stack or car model, either on your computer screen or print one out, and ask yourself about the cookie situation and walk through the logic in your own life using your car model or cognitive function stack of how to make this decision to go buy that pack of cookies or not. So then you're going to walk through your cognitive functions, starting with your driver or your dominant, your auxiliary or co-pilot, your 10-year-old or tertiary, and your inferior or 3-year-old. And at each one of those 4 cognitive functions, you're going to ask yourself, what is this cognitive function's relationship to cookies? As you go through this, you're also going to determine the last time you made this decision to go buy a pack of cookies, which part of your personality was the dominant part of you that made that decision? Which part of you was in charge of that decision, or at least had a lot of influence? Because obviously, again, any decision's a system running. Not one of these cognitive functions operated in isolation for you. You obviously use them as a chorus or as a grouping, a system running to get the decision you made. So how did that system run, and how did you get that decision the last time you bought cookies?
Yeah, because I can tell you, neither my extroverted intuition exploration function or my introverted thinking accuracy function gives 2 wits about cookies. Like, neither of them care at all. My extroverted intuition dominant driver, it cares about cookies I've never seen before. If there's a cookie in front of me that is a really weird, unique, exotic flavor, suddenly that function is interested. But otherwise, doesn't give 2 craps about cookies. My extroverted feeling harmony function, particularly when I'm sad and wants to self-medicate, is very interested in nurturing myself in that way. Cookies are very intriguing to my 10-year-old or tertiary. And my inferior function, my introverted sensing inferior or 3-year-old, that memory process, will mindlessly consume cookies while passively being entertained by content that I've seen before or is making me somehow feel a sense of home or safety or security. So cookies are 100% of the time determined by that 10-year-old tertiary and inferior 3-year-old for me. And of course, I'm sure like in my shadow function is of extroverted sensing or sensation. There's a part of me that just likes the experience of tasting the cookie, etc. But as far as my 4 functions, like my driver and auxiliary or driver dominant auxiliary copilot, neither of those functions gives 2 craps about cookies. So cookies are always a backseat decision for me. But I would imagine that if somebody is using, say, extroverted feeling harmony as their driver dominant or auxiliary copilot, or if they're using like extroverted sensing, right? I would imagine that those types would have a different relationship to the concept of consuming cookies. And it might be that somebody who's like leading with extroverted sensing or sensation, like an ESP, when they're considering cookies, this is probably a far more sophisticated engagement with the act of consuming food, because they're pitting it against how it actually literally kinesthetically long-term makes their body feel, right? And so a person who's like an ESP, they might enjoy the flavor of a well-done cookie, but they might hate the feeling that the cookie gives them. Or conversely, it might be something that makes them feel really good. And so because of that, they have to like sort of wrestle with and discipline their body to feel the kinesthetic feelings of not consuming the cookie and understanding, or a pack of cookies, and understanding how that actually increases their enjoyment of their kinesthetic body. And so these can actually be complex relationships that each of these functions have with something as simple as a cookie. And then if you extrapolate that same principle and then put in much more higher stakes situations, it at least gives you a guide, a map for here's the decision I have to make. Here's my function's relationship to that thing. And here are the ways in which it's going to trick me. And here is the check and balance system that my other functions will be able to employ or implement while I'm making this decision.
One thing you said that really hit home to me is you said, buying a pack of cookies will always be a backseat decision for me. And I realized we have categories of decisions. Certain decisions live in certain parts of our personality system that's running. And you said that'll always be a backseat. And I bet there's a bunch of those. There's a bunch of always backseat decisions. And there's probably a bunch of front seat decisions in our car model cognitive function stack. And so just that, going through these exercises like this can also just give us a sense of where we're looking into our system to make decisions. So when we sit down to make them, those categories, it's in the realm of food or comfort, it's probably always going to be in my back seat, you might say to yourself, depending on your personality, obviously listening. But that's something I think also for self-awareness to know how you process these, how you categorize them.
Yeah, and it's going to be, you're totally right, and it's going to be different for each type. Like international travel is always a front seat decision for me.
Same here.
But for an ISJ, international travel might always be a backseat decision. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like just because something's a backseat decision doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means you should understand, it should be always routed through and vetted through the front seat as well. Everybody's got to be on board with a backseat decision. Whereas if it's a front seat decision, the kids don't necessarily need to be consulted in those.
Well, yeah. And I think that's really important as we're moving through. So as you make the decision to either look at your car model on your computer screen or print it out and go ahead and process your question of, do I buy a pack of cookies, and walk through this exercise, we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com and directly below this show, answer that question. Tell us how your process was. Tell us how you went through the question of, should I buy a pack of cookies? Maybe it's another decision you want to run through. That's cool too. Maybe you have some time on your hands to run through a couple of these and share them with us in the community here at Personality Hacker. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see how you're using these ideas we're talking about in your life to get better at your decision making. So come over to personalityhacker.com and tell us, should you buy that pack of cookies?
Yeah. I hope I did okay, because I've been really sick. You can probably tell in my voice that I've actually been pretty sick. And I've had that kind of sickness that makes your sinuses feel like they're stuffed with cotton. And I hope that to you, dear listener, I hope that anything I said made any sense at all. Because on a regular basis, I had to stop this or pause this podcast and look at Joel and go, did that make any sense? And he's like, yeah, I think so. So my apologies if this is one of the more weird, tangential, abstract one that you couldn't keep up with. But if you forgive me, and you know you like this, like instinctively you know you would like this podcast if I wasn't sick with the sinus thing, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and other Android platforms. We have programs, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. We have programs and products that are personal development and growth oriented, that take your specific personality type and help you make better decisions in your life. And so if those are intriguing and interesting to you, you can go visit us at personalityhacker.com and look through our course catalog. And of course, our book is available at all major book retailers. And so go check out that book as well.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.